Why is Jayden Daniels rising and Jalen Hurts falling in fantasy football rankings of quarterback for 2025 after NFL free agency? It's time to break it down right here, right now, as we get another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. My co-host, Michelle Majuk, is off today, so we'll be flying solo again on today's show. What we're going to look at is an early stock watch for quarterbacks in fantasy football based on the results of NFL free agency. Now, there are already some things fluctuating, that's right, on the consensus rankings according to Fantasy Pros. Right at the top, we'll find out why Jayden Daniels is sliding above Jalen Hurts, and we'll look in the middle to see what's happening among the mid-tier QB1s, and then near the bottom, the QB 10 through 12, there's some changes there as well. So we'll get to all of that on today's show. Before we do that, I got to tell you this episode, Locked On Fantasy Football, is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Check it out. Get in on the action now. It is March Madness coming up, so it is a great time to check out FanDuel Sportsbook, only there for your March Madness action. All right, we are going to dive right in, and we're going to look at early among the elite QBs. Now, there's a top tier at QB that includes Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. So far, things have gone well for those guys. Josh Allen has added a weapon here in Josh Palmer. They extended Khalil Shakir, and the Ravens have added DeAndre Hopkins into the mix for Lamar Jackson. So those guys hold steady as their elite quarterback positions here, probably 1-2 off the board in some order. But there's a shuffling right behind them where Jayden Daniels has passed Jalen Hurts on a lot of boards. Why is it happening? Well, we know that the Commanders were our biggest offseason offensive winners so far, according to yesterday's show. So if you want to see the other 5 teams that qualified for that. But individually as a quarterback, it's especially great for Jayden Daniels. He's got Deebo Samuel, that legitimate number 2 receiver. We also got some extra news here that they're keeping some other weapons, including Noah Brown and KJ Osborne. Zach Ertz was re-signed. Of course, the left tackle, Laramie Tunsil, comes in to not only help with the pass protection, Jayden Daniels throwing downfield, but also with his running to the outside as an edge runner and taking off downfield. So really good developments so far for Jayden Daniels as a runner, as a passer. Jalen Hurts, look, they've taken some hits there. A lot of defensive guys have left, including Josh Sweat and Milton Williams up front. They lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Darius Slay on the back end. Offensively, they're still kind of sorting it out. Their line is reshuffling a bit. Looks like they're not going to bring back Mekhi Becton. They're looking at Kenyon Green up front. So yet another interior change with Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson up there for the Eagles. And then they've mixed up the backfield a little bit. A.J. Dillon is now in the mix. So power back adds to the equation here with Saquon Barkley, a guy that has scored touchdowns in bunches for the Packers. So maybe the rushing touchdowns go down a little bit. The offensive line takes a little bit of a hit. We'll see what else happens. They still are an A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. So we look at this and say, look, Jayden Daniels, the arrow's pointing up here, and Jalen Hurts sliding down. And look, that's not saying you wouldn't want to consider taking Jalen Hurts over Jayden Daniels. We just need to see a little bit more of the draft. They've talked about potentially cutting Dallas Goedert. They lost his backup, Jack Stoll. They replaced him with Harrison Bryant in the former Browns tight end. So they still have some depth there that you can look at for the Eagles, and they're going to try to reboot their passing game as well as they can. But again, we're still down to 2 weapons here, Hurts and Brown and Smith in that combination in the passing game, and then you have a whole bunch of run heaviness here from Saquon Barkley. I think they'll keep some of that mentality without Kellen Moore, who's now the head coach with the Saints. So again, the Eagles are still a running team at heart. If those touchdowns ever drop down a little bit, we don't get the same tush-push production here from Jalen Hurts, that's going to significantly change his numbers because that's a big part of what he does. Well, Jayden Daniels can rush for 1,000 yards. He can probably score 6 times on the ground and put up 30-plus touchdowns through the air. So that's why the arrow is pounding up for Jayden Daniels, ascending player in year 2 with some weapons that have really improved around him. So, look, these are really tight things that you look at, but we're just looking at the pure numbers when we look at the combined production that these guys can put up in 2025. Right now, you got to say it sides with Daniels over Hurts. Now, would you take Daniels over Allen or Jackson? That would be hard, right? Allen's coming off a big year. He still scores in bunches. His receiving core is better. We know that Lamar Jackson is kind of the OG of what Jayden Daniels can be, right? So he kind of has the blueprint of maybe throwing for 4,000 yards, 40 touchdowns, and also rushing for a big total here in the NFL in year 2. So Jayden Daniels, the arrow is pointing up. Hurts could be coming down a little bit. He's just been so good for fantasy that he could have a little regression. I still think they're in a top tier by themselves with Allen Jackson in the top 4. So that's how you have to explore these quarterbacks going in. But right now you have to say that it's Daniels over Hurts 3-4 there in the early going when we're looking at drafting a quarterback in 2025. Now we'll get to the middle here, and one player's ascending. We know that Joe Burrow's kind of where he's at. Jared Goff really status quo with their production from last year, but there's one player's ascending because we had a surprise development in free agency, and one that's kind of trying to find weapons again. So we'll get into those 2 picks after our word from our sponsor. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Monarch Money as well. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. And it's just great. You'll get surprising insights all the time. Tell you what you spend on food delivery and how you can budget smarter and save more in certain areas. All in one conveniences there. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can look at all your finances, track spending, and even play long-term goals there at Monarch Money. Easy to collaborate with your partner, smoother than ever, so you can look at shared personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKDOWNNFL at monarchmoney.com. for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKDOWNNFL for half off your first year using Monarch Money, one of the best budgeting apps you'll ever use in your lifetime. All right, it is time to continue the show and go to the middle tier. So we're looking at QB5, QB6, and we look at 12-team leagues. So this is right in the middle. Baker Mayfield, good developments for him. They bring back Chris Godwin. Apparently, he took a $20 million lesser contract to return to Tampa. So we were worried about him leaving, maybe with Liam Cohen. They moved on from Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram in Jacksonville. We thought that could be a destination. We thought Chris Godwin might be with the Steelers and end up in that offense. Instead, they trade for DK Metcalf. Then we also worried about the Patriots stealing Chris Godwin to be their primary slot receiver. None of that happened. Godwin returns to where he has been in his career the whole time with Mike Evans. So Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, that trio is intact here for 2025. Great passing group there. And I think this offense will continue to thrive without Liam Cohen. We've had the transition to Dave Canales to Liam Cohen. And now we're starting over again with the Buccaneers, but they just have so much upside and talent with this passing game. They should remain pass heavy. So I really like the opportunity for Baker Mayfield to build on last year. Again, another guy that hit that 40 touchdown mark. I think he can build on that for sure and throw for a high volume. I think this defense has been in transition. I know they kept Levante David. They did bring back Anthony Nelson, did add Hassan Reddick to that pass rush, but some question marks still in the secondary, getting a little bit older, need some other linebacker help. So I think the Buccaneers are going to struggle a bit on defense. They are more situationally built to rush the passer, so that means they have to build leads with their passing game or be in a position to come back often with their passing game. And Baker Mayfield, of all the pocket passers, when you look at Joe Burrow, he's right there behind him. I would say Burrow comes in at QB5, and then you look at Baker Mayfield next. He has more appeal than Jared Goff, and really the next guy that is on the list here is Patrick Mahomes. Now, it has not been great for Patrick Mahomes so far in free agency. They kept Marquise Hollywood Brown, but DeAndre Hopkins is gone. Then we had questions about now more off-field issues with Xavier Worthy on top of what's going on with Rashee Rice coming back with an injury. So questions about these two speedy young receivers. Maybe that's what prompted them to go after Marquise Brown and make sure he stayed a Chief. Again, losing Hopkins, maybe not seeming like a big deal, but he's out. in terms of having that veteran presence for Mahomes. Then they made a change at tight end, added Robert Tonyan, the former guy that's been on basically every NFC North team and made some plays. Like, he's not going to ever recreate his double-digit touchdown season in Green Bay, but adding some depth pieces. Travis Kelce is returning. That's the piece of good news that came here for Mahomes, but he lost Joe Thuney. We'll see about Jalen Moore if he can hold up. He was a backup for the 49ers. They spent a lot of money to elevate him to a starter at tackle for the Chiefs. So, again, a lot of changes around Mahomes. Again, he's adjusted well to that. We'll see what they do in the backfield here. But losing Vinnie Hurts, trying to incorporate a new tackle. They have Smith, so that's good. But are they going to lean a little bit more toward the run? Is it still going to lean a lot of defense? They did spend quite a bit to keep defensive pieces intact here. They made sure that they weren't going to take too many hits there. So you got Nick Bolton coming back, which is good for them and their purposes up front. So, again, this defense shouldn't slip too much. That means Mahomes is not going to suddenly be involved in too many extra shootouts against weaker teams this season. And, again, offensive line takes a hit. They got to figure out what they're doing with the receiving core. We'll see if there's any kind of discipline coming down for Worthy or Rice, or we have to wait that out at some point. We've kind of run into this bad luck a lot with the Chiefs. It seems like they just can't keep their guys on the field because of off-field things that we're always concerned about. So, again, Chiefs, we'll see where they go. They haven't added receiving back either in free agency. That would give Mahomes a boost to his numbers. So when you look at it, Mayfield, again, has everything that you're looking for. Bucky Irving out of the backfield. Rashad White can catch the ball. Cade Otton is an ascending player. Three very good receivers there now with McMillan's emergence and keeping Godwin with Evans. Evans is still getting it done. So when you compare these two guys, it's not even close here that Mayfield is moving up. He's solidified himself as the QB6, I believe, and maybe – being undersold there in relation to Joe Burrow. We'll see. We'll make sure that T. Higgins franchise tag, signed, sealed, delivered is a long-term contract here. That would help make us feel very certain about Joe Burrow as the QB5. But, again, you look at Mahomes, you look at Jared Goff, you look at Jordan Love, some of these guys that were in that running for that QB6 overall, kind of right in the middle. Baker Mayfield is in a better situation than all of them to continue that production. So, again, I didn't expect Godwin to return, but now that he has, it's advantage Mayfield there. Now, you can look at Jared Goff. Look, so far, it's been pretty status quo. He did lose Ben Johnson, so you'd say it levels off a little bit without his play calling. You still have kind of the same receivers there, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameis Williams, and Sam Laporta, so it's kind of even here for Jared Goff. He doesn't get a bump up. Look at Burrow, pretty even, right? Same type of weapons he had last year. Mike Gesicki has returned to tight end. So, again, all those guys have flattened out where they were. So, Burrow slightly ahead of Mayfield. We have Goff slightly behind Mayfield. And then Mahomes, I know, is looking a little higher on some boards than we expected, but I still don't think the gap has been closed there for the production we're looking for with our fantasy football quarterback. Now, we'll go to the bottom of the QB1. So this is kind of that 9 to 12 range, and see who's up and down there in our final segment on the show. But it's time again to hear from one of our great sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. We said at the top, it is March Madness time. I'll have some advice there that you can check out at sportingnews.com. And FanDuel is going to give you the chance to get in on the action like never before with March Madness and the tournament. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets in the end in April after all the madness in March. See how you're picking your favorites, see who you like, get in on the underdogs, get those easy lines. It's easy to back all those teams with spreads, totals, and game props. Stay in the action with tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. It's easy and fast. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So check it out. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action. All tournament wrong, only at FanDuel, the home of March Madness action. All right, it's time to close the show, and we will wait on those other quarterback moves to happen. We're still waiting on what the Giants and Steelers are going to do, mainly because we want to know what Russell Wilson's going to do and Aaron Rodgers is going to do. So there's a lot of still in flux that could happen, but we're not looking at either of those guys necessarily as fantasy assets we're banging the table for. But these next two guys definitely are on the radar. And one already has a big contract extension. The other does not. And we'll start with Justin Herbert. Michelle loves Justin Herbert. We've been pushing him up the boards. is continue to be a good offseason for them. They brought back Mike Williams, by the way. So he had a cup of coffee with the Steelers and the Jets last year, but now back in an offense where he's familiar with the quarterback. So Mike Williams, good flyer here, pretty cheap 1-year deal for him to return. We'll see about Keenan Allen. There's rumors that Allen can also return on a cheap deal here for the Chargers offense. Then all of a sudden you got Allen and Williams back. You got Najee Harris already. He's a pretty good receiver. I think they'll go after a tight end in the draft. They've kind of held close to the vest here and going after any of the weak tight ends in free agency. So I think the draft as well where they'll do that. And then you look at Ladd McConkey, if he can get going with Williams and they bring back Allen, then you got some familiarity, a good scheme. Harris also opening things up with his power running and being able to throw downfield off play action. So Justin Herbert, we liked him based on the way he finished Greg Roman's offense. They've done things to bolster that as we continue. They were going after Harris. I think the other thing that they like about Harris, again, he can catch passes, but he can also hold up in pass protection, use his big body there and frame and take pressure off Justin Herbert, whether he's carrying the ball, catching the ball, or coming in there to block. He can have effectiveness there. So I think that's where the upgrade lies over J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards, who was released. Dobbins is a free agent because Harris can be on the field for all 3 downs and do the little things well. So Harris has a really good vibe here coming to the Chargers. So we know that. We talked about how much we love that move. Well, in turn, it's going to help Justin Herbert. Again, play action passing game downfield, having that power attack, using Herbert's big arm here. Now you got a field stretcher back in Mike Williams. I don't think they're done looking at receiver talent. I think they basically had to go back to Mike Williams with Joshua Palmer going to the Bills. But again, Williams has always been a little bit more comfortable when healthy connecting with Justin Herbert downfield. So I'm excited to see what that can happen here with that combination returning. Let's hope that Allen ends up there. Maybe Cooper Kupp changes addresses and goes cross town and helps McConkey and Williams in this attacking. And I expect a tight end. And overall, the offensive arrow is pointing up for the Chargers. So I like it. Justin Herbert right now, look, I think he could end up being drafted as a quarterback 8. Right now, he's like around 9 or 10. That makes a lot of sense because there's some people ahead of him, but Herbert definitely has a lot of upside in the guy that you want to target in a lot of drafts. Now, finally, let's look at the guy that's dropping. And you may not be surprised by this one because this team has been gutted of offensive weapons so far. There was even rumors that Brandon Ayuk could be traded. That's right. It's the 49ers. Deebo Samuel traded to the Commanders. Kyle Juszczyk, a key cog in what they're doing all over the field. He was released. Multiple teams are looking at him. Behind Christian McCaffrey, they did not keep Elijah Mitchell. So, again, they're in flux here with this passing game. Look, there's some potential for Purdy, but it is a pressure of the post-contract year. We still expect him to get that deal. And behind Purdy, they added Mac Jones, which is not insignificant because he's a guy thought of in the 2021 draft that he might have been going to the 49ers in the Kyle Shanahan system. So a little bit better contingency just in case there's something that Brock Purdy has a setback with if the supporting cast doesn't help him as much. So that's what it seemed like, that Brock Purdy is more of a dependent quarterback, needs all these weapons around him to be successful. I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but in fantasy, it's a little tougher when you have fewer weapons, right? And they do have a key fewer weapon in Deebo Samuel. I know Samuel wasn't having the same type of impact, but now we have a lot of what ifs. Can Juwan Jennings step up into a bigger veteran role opposite Ayuk? Can Ricky Pearsall take that big jump after a flash here in his rookie season? Is Christian McCaffrey going to be healthy? Just a lot of question marks we still are trying to navigate through for the 49ers here as we go forward. And again, I don't know how much they trust Purdy totally. I know they want to give him the big contract, and I think he deserves it, but there's a little concern about the elbow injury and all those things to be a little bit buyer beware or more extender beware on Purdy. I would expect him to get his deal. He deserves it for what he's done as Mr. Relevant, taking his team to the Super Bowl, throwing downfield at a high level. So I wouldn't say that he's totally the guy that we're going to slip too far down. But when you look at it in relation to Justin Herbert, the arrow is pointing up in his particular offense. You go there. Now, Purdy, again, this defense could be a little bit better for the 49ers as well with Robert Saleh returning. We'll see. They lost some defensive pieces there, including Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Fanga. They're resetting a little bit at the edge here for the 49ers. So I just think solid scheming is just going to make them better on that side of the ball regardless. And again, if McCaffrey comes, I think there'll be a bigger rushing presence on this team there with Jordan Mason. So I would also expect them to explore getting a backup back in the draft here based on Isaac Rendo and his durability concerns, and then also moving on from Elijah Mitchell, who signed with the Chiefs there to help what they have with Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, Hunt being a free agent there. So when you lose all these weapons, guys that can make some plays, you are concerned a little bit for the 49ers. They can reboot, they can fit a lot of guys in their system, but there's just a lot of variables around Jennings, Pearsall, and McCaffrey that make you just pause a little bit in investing too high in Brock Purdy, especially being a pocket passer and not having the running cheat code. And Justin Herbert's going to give you more of that, right? He's a good athlete. He's going to help you put up the numbers. Same thing with Mayfield versus Mahomes. They're both guys who run, but Mayfield tends to do it more for production than Mahomes. Mahomes does it to more to extend plays. And Daniels, by pure yardage alone, the touchdowns may still favor Hurts this year, but what you're looking at is Daniels being the better yardage quarterback going forward, much like the consistency we've seen with Lamar Jackson as he's in tune with his real offense. So there you have it. There's a stock watch, 3 quarterbacks up, 3 quarterbacks down here based on the early waves of free agency. These are guys just the top 12. If you look out, I think Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, those are some guys who the arrow is pointing downward to. Well, down, then you look a little bit further down the list, Caleb Williams, Drake May, the arrow's pointing up for those guys. So we'll be talking about them plenty as we go through this offseason, but maybe some guys are going to plummet more and be totally off our radar as QB2s versus QB2s like May and Williams that can really move up and be drafted pretty highly when it comes to starters, at least in Superflex 2 QB leagues, be a high end or at least a guy that you play the matchups with. So these are the guys, again, that you would be considering as a starter. Again, right now it's explaining Daniels over Hurts, Mayfield over Mahomes, and Herbert over Purdy. That's exactly how it should look on a lot of fantasy football rankings, and totally agree with that at this stage of the offseason. Still plenty more to come. We'll carry you through the rest of free agents, see what happens with Rodgers and Wilson. We'll see what happens with the draft. A lot of things can change the stock and value of these players in the rankings. This is just the start. Thank you for listening and watching Locked On Fantasy Football. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.